Hello and welcome again to another episode of SacTown Talks. Today we have a part two of our one of two parts of the clip shows, the most popular and liked clips of 2021. So here's another clip we have for you that was quite popular when we were talking with the code enforcement officers, kind of about what they do and their involvement in local communities and kind of some funny things that's happened to them as they're out there kind of enforcing the codes. Do you guys each have, a story that explains not only what you do, but something funny that's happened in your world of code enforcement?
Goodness, that's a good question. And yeah, absolutely. I think some of the funnier ones that we've had to deal with, or that I've had to deal with personally, is trying to identify a chicken to see if it's a chicken or a rooster. I mean, this whole education on chickens that's gone on. They have service chickens now too. So they're important, not just for eggs.
That's funny. Mm-hmm. What about yourself, Matt?
Yeah. So, it's funny. I was offered a job as a code officer when I was in college. I had no idea what the heck a code officer was. And, I'm actually a practicing lawyer and a certified code officer. I represent code folks throughout the state. And it's funny. I still struggle to explain it to folks. What do we do? So I like to just say, we keep communities clean. Absolutely. If you have an issue you complain about, we're the ones dealing with that issue. Right. Funny story. Something I love about it is you never cease to be amazed. It's always something new. I remember having a lot of bizarre cases, but one of them was a illegal cockfighting ring with also coupled up with an unlicensed dentistry office. So I guess it was like a bet on rooster number 5 and then go get your molar fixed or something. Right. Interesting combination there.
That's too much. That's funny. Both involving chickens. So
right.
Good poultry out there going on. So, good to know. Everyone's doing those backyard chicken things these days. I could see that being a problem.
Yeah. And that's kind of the lighter side of it. Obviously, we deal with some really heavy issues with housing. That's a really big thing. I read some stat the other day that there's tens of millions of people in our country who are living in substandard housing. We may be a really rich economy, but we have a tremendous substandard housing crisis in California. Ghost ship fire in Oakland, 36 people died or so, something around there. That's exactly something we deal with and try to do better to prevent.
And encompassing too with that is, like Matt was saying, it's not all funny or, with the substandard housing, but it can be very dangerous. Spinoff too from KCO, our association has been the Code Enforcement Officer Safety Foundation, which is actually focused on officer safety specifically. And because of certain situations, like Jill Robinson from the state of Utah in 2018, she had an open property nuisance case at a location. She went to the property to meet the homeowner to talk about all the violations. And he showed up with a gun and shot her through her city truck door and then lit her on fire and lit the neighbor's house on fire. So, just very tragic things like that. And she was just going there for a regular, talking to the person and just that first meetup.
Yeah. We've had about 20 code officers actually murdered in the line of duty. And I think, most people don't know what a code officer is, and they certainly aren't going to know the risks that we face. So whereas, we face all sorts of threats, intimidation, all sorts of things. You can imagine people aren't always appreciative. Of course, the people who call and complain, the tenants whose lives we save, they're appreciative. But, these other folks aren't so appreciative. So all the more reason we're so thankful for you helping us spread this awareness and having us on your show to talk about what it is we do and good-hearted people trying to do good things.
Yeah, this was an entertaining campaign lesson for everyone out there looking to run. Kip Mueller stopped by and kind of told us about, in the campaign he lost to Senator Scott Wilk, about how Scott Wilk was able to kind of come up with a catchy jingle that caught on and became quite popular in the race. In the media, they always portray, when a race is over, is there any communication between you and the opponent? Did you and Senator Wilk ever talk or concede or have a conversation after the race was over?
Yeah, we did. And it was very cordial, and I was happy about that. At times, our campaign and it did become a little bit, there there was some negative stuff that I would say both sides did to some degree. And, you try to distinguish yourself from your opponent. And sometimes that comes across negative too. And we had a wonderful conversation. What was funny was he created this song about me that was on the radio locally, and it was very catchy. And I actually was able to get a hold of it, and like at the time sent it to family and friends, just cracking up. So it's so funny. It wasn't true. It was about how I was going to decimate Prop 13, which wasn't true, and all this other stuff. Right. Whatever. It's a political, ad. But it was, and I told him that. I said, I gotta hand it to you. That was really catchy. But the thing was, everybody knew the song, and people, a lot of people learned my name from it. And I told him, I don't know if it worked totally against me. We were like, so many people knew my name, and he's like, yeah, well, maybe, I don't know. Yeah. So we had a really friendly. No, he's a really nice guy, and I never said when I was campaigning or running for office that I'm running against him because I have anything personal against him. He's a nice guy.
Right. What was the song like keyed to, or was it similar to something we'd know?
It kind of sounded like Randy Newman. That's what made it so catchy. It had that like Randy Newman kind of piano. Right. I actually don't even remember right in this moment the melody of it, but it just had this like that Randy Newman style like catchiness to it. Yeah, it was funny.
Here's another clip again with Mike kind of talking about the end of session and about how kind of it's a festivus. It's an airing of grievances. And so, all the members are tired and kind of getting kind of grumpy, and they're all, kind of speaking their mind, letting people know what's going on. So here's Mike kind of talking about the end of session grouchiness. Something you alluded to earlier was kind of this tension between the houses. And this is something we hear all the time of, the Senate's holding bills or the Assembly's holding bills because, they're mad about something. You were, in leadership and, appropriations chairman, kind of, what was your experience with that? And, as someone, high ranking in the Assembly, is that something you ever got involved with, kind of negotiating with the Senate, or, is it more just, lore?
Yeah, so all the time. I mean, there were many ends of sessions where, I was fortunate, I guess, or maybe cursed to be part of leadership during my entire 7 years. I think maybe I take that back. Maybe my first term, I was not technically part of leadership. But so I was always, even when I wasn't chair of appropriations, there were times where for whatever reason, there was some type of big negotiation, for example, on a water bond or something like that, where, the Assembly needed to negotiate with the Senate. And certainly when I was chair of appropriations, there were many end of sessions where we found ourselves, going over to the Senate to try to say, hey, you really didn't treat this member fairly, or this bill deserves a hearing, or, please let this bill out. And then the Senate would give us their list of grievances. It was a Festivus, end of session Festivus session where their grievances would be aired, and we would try our best to try to keep the peace. I can tell you that that also brings up something that I think the public really doesn't understand about the legislative process. I talked a little bit earlier about something else that they don't understand. But what they don't understand, what I think the public doesn't understand a lot, is how much the legislative process is a give and take, and how much both houses need each other, and how much individual lawmakers need other lawmakers. The best example that I would give is every once in a while, I would get called to the carpet, or I would be questioned by a constituent about a marginal bill. Not a bill that was, pure evil, and not a bill that was pure good, but a bill that was really, sort of obviously open to many different opinions. And a constituent would say, why did you vote yes on that bill? Let me make my passionate case. And why did you vote yes on that bill? And I would say, well, I saw both points, and I agree with you. Yeah, it probably wasn't that the greatest bill. But, you understand that the author is the chair of blah, blah, blah. And I needed that person to put forth the legislative agenda that I have done for your organization and for my district. And they would never get that. They would never understand that. But the best way that I could, hope to help, any member of the public that's watching this understand is that imagine you got elected because your key thing in your district is education reform. You are so passionate about making sure that the kids in your area have the same access to higher education, or, just a solid K through 12 education, that you feel that they deserve and that they're not getting. And then you just imagine that there is a bill that is authored by the chair of the key education committee that you need to get your key reform through next year or that year. You might give that person a little bit more consideration than otherwise, right? And that's why legislative power and being a chairperson is so important. It really helps you get your agenda done, and it helps your district in the long run. But it's also something to where if that chair of that education committee authored a bad bill, your district might not always understand why you voted yes on it.
Right. I guess another interesting kind of part of end of session is the committee process, and how that kind of evolves towards the end. Kind of what are some of your memories about some of the last minute committee you would hold either as appropriations chair or one of the other committees you held, in these last minute hearings? And did you ever have any on the floor committee hearings or quick committee hearings where you had to do one real quick to hear a bill?
Oh yeah, great question. So, without getting into the complicated rules, in many cases, the mechanism for making an amendment, especially without rule waivers, through the committee process. And in many cases, you want to at least have the record show that a committee did hear a bill. But that being said, many, many times, committees would hold hurried meetings off the floor. I remember gigantic committees that I served on, including appropriations, being called in the rules room, which is, Capital Insiders know is rather tiny. And, we would have, 50 sweating lobbyists in the room with us as we, hastily considered something. That really always contributes to the tension toward the end of session. It contributes to the sense that things are hurried. And, some would argue it doesn't always make for the most deliberate policymaking.
And here's Anthony York and Paul Mitchell kind of talking about the Scott Lay Memorial Fund, which will be used to kind of help people like Scott and Paul who came from the community college area and kind of help them through school and, something that Scott was quite passionate about.
Yeah. So that's a cool thing. You guys have started, a scholarship fund in Scott's name. Can you kind of tell us about that?
Yeah. So Orange Coast College, which is where we went to community college, we contacted them right away. They set up immediately a memorial scholarship. We would love for people to donate. It already has over $20,000 in it. It's going to be an endowed scholarship, which means that whatever money's raised, they're going to calculate the interest essentially and whatever would come from that amount of money. Mm-hmm. And every year do scholarships to that amount so that this goes on in perpetuity in his name. And I'm hoping that next year that I'll get to go down to the community college. And David Grant was the college president when we were students, and he's actually still on the board of trustees. So we're hoping that Dave Grant and I can give the scholarship in his name.
That's awesome.
And there's a link to it. If you want to check it out, we can send it to you as well. But if you go to Around the Capitol, which is the website that hosts the Nooner, there's a link to the scholarship fund there on the site.
And we'll
can
link
amend that too.
We'll link it to this too.
Yeah, it updates the website and the email.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. That's what you guys have a goal of how much you guys expect to raise, or?
Well, I don't know.
It's pretty impressive what you already got.
Yeah, there were a lot of people. There's some people whose doors I'm going to go knocking on and say like, hey, it'd be great if you give a little bit of money for this.
Why are you looking at me?
Associations, other groups that I know benefited from Scott's time here.
Indeed.
And so I haven't done that yet, but we've been getting a lot. The guy who runs the scholarship program at Orange Coast said that his phone goes off every time somebody makes a donation, just because he's like, and he said it's just been incredible. He says like every hour there's another little bleep on his phone. So
yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
Just seeing on Twitter, just at the outpouring of reporters and politicians.
Yeah, Adam Schiff tweeted a whole thing. Jimmy Gomez tweeted a thing. A bunch of members tweeted things.
Obits in the LA Times and the Bee, which I think we pointed out. Scott would love all of that.
He would have loved that.
He really loved it.
Yeah, especially here, kind of closing down in 2021. Scott Lay was always a big part of kind of keeping us abreast of his thoughts and things that are going on, and with all these political wins and changes, especially with the redistricting. The lack of Scott's voice was quite noticeable. So here's a clip with two of his best friends, Anthony York and Paul Mitchell, remembering Scott Lay.
I guess that's one thing kind of you pointed out on Twitter is Scott the advocate. budget wonk, knew everything, great on the mic. That was a great testimony you saw. Can you kind of tell us about how Scott was as an advocate working for the league, and how he learned everything in the budget and everything like that?
I mean, definitely tireless and passionate. This was also a time where there were fee increases happening every year at UC, and so the fight for access was one that I think Scott was driven, that drove him,
right.
Coming through the community college process, sort of taking his own sort of non-traditional path. He was not only very knowledgeable, but extremely passionate. And that can be a dangerous combination in politics, right? To have that level of knowledge and passion, but that Scott clearly had.
Yeah, and he definitely had a little flair too. I remember one of our first big events was in community college. We had this funeral for education. And I still have one of these little funeral placards. And we had a funeral gravestone for every class that had been canceled that year because of budget cuts.
Right.
And it filled up the quad. And, Scott and I were on TV, and it was this whole thing. And he was constantly focused on these things about, access to the community colleges, whether it was fees or, just programs and services for people who are kind of the underrepresented in the community college system. And he was really progressive, or really passionate about a lot of progressive causes, and took that kind of student lens to his work, even when he was representing the chancellors or the superintendents and the trustees at the Community College League. He was very much like working for the administration, but with a student lens.
Mm-hmm. And
some of his, testimony in the Capitol, like that snippet that Lance Lewis found, was, him being really passionate. And And like Scott said, there sometimes is kind of this gulf between those who are the most activist and passionate and those who knew like the actual legal stuff. It would be like you'd have the rabble-rousing activist, and then you'd have like Rick Simpson, who would be the only person who actually knew what the actual law said.
Right.
And Scott blended those two things. And then one of the most amazing things about Scott was I became a policy expert in higher education policy. So I was the chief consultant to the Assembly Higher Education Committee. I knew a lot of this stuff, but I basically built up walls. I was like, well, I know higher ed, but don't even bring me a K-12 bill. I don't want to read a K-12 bill.
Right.
That's too much. I'm not going to read that. And then I ended up getting a job working in K-12. So I became kind of an expert in some K-12 policy, but I was like, well, just don't show me a water policy. I don't want to pay attention to that.
Right.
But Scott was the opposite. Like he knew so many crazy different policy areas and just soaked it all up. I haven't even told you this, but I went by his house with the family as we're going through some stuff. And there was this, like just a notebook. And it was notes of him being on the phone probably with people. And it was bill numbers and issues. And it was just like, it was insane, like the stuff that the way he was so connected to so many different policy areas, talking to so many different, almost like a reporter's instinct with that, like just absorbing this, and his ability to absorb and transfer that information to people. I talked to a friend, Evan McLaughlin, who also works for us in the redistricting stuff, and he said that when he was chief of staff to Lorena Gonzalez, he would be in like a 45-minute meeting with somebody about a policy. And at the end, he'd be like, I could have just read this all in the Nooner.